Hello, my lovely history class. So I just got to talk to my awesome girl. She's flying to Tennessee today, so I'm in a really happy mood. Just thought I'd give you guys an update on that. Okay, so we are reading chapter 24, Sailing South, section 1, Captain Cook reaches Botany Bay. So we are going to be reading about this. And this on the map, I really would like you guys to check this out in your book since I didn't have you do any map work. Okay, see where the arrows are pointing, see what we're talking about so that this makes more sense just geographically on the map. Okay, in a London lodging house, Captain James Cook was writing up a list of supplies for a long, long voyage. He had been hired by the English government to make a scientific expedition to sail to Tahiti on the other side of the globe and look at the planet Venus. Telescopes, measuring instruments, map-making supplies, all sat around him in boxes, ready to be packed neatly away into the hold of the ship, the Endeavour. That was the name of the ship. Sailing to distant places was like meat and drink to James Cook. In his 33 years, he had never been over much of the world. He had already been, wow, that was weird. In his 33 years, he had already been over much of the world, drawing maps and investigating strange new islands and coastlines. During the 7 Years' War, he had mapped out the coast of Canada so that the British could sail up to Quebec and capture it. He had sailed on coal ships and on warships, on flagships and on barges. So he had sailed on all different types of ships, exploring the world and having different conquests. But this trip was something different. James Cook knew that observing Venus was a valuable assignment. When Venus passed between the sun and the earth, the passage or transit couldn't be seen in England, only from the southern part of the planet Earth. I did not know that. The Royal Society was counting on Cook to take careful measurements so they could study this transit, which wouldn't happen again for 100 years. They wanted to see when Venus passed between the Earth and the sun because you couldn't see it from the part of the world they were in. Yes, Venus was interesting, but more interesting to Cook was the sealed envelope in the bottom of his sea chest. A royal messenger from the court of George III had given it to him. The envelope contained secret orders, a mysterious mission which Cook would undertake. But he wasn't allowed to open it until he had finished watching Venus, so he first had to complete his assignment before he could open this. When the Endeavour was ready, Cook and his crew set off. The men couldn't wait to get to Tahiti, rumored to be full of warm beaches, fresh food, and the most beautiful women in the world. The Tahitians, very beautiful. 8 months later, the Endeavour arrived at Tahiti's white sand shores. The islands were even more beautiful than the sailors had imagined. The natives of Tahiti garlanded them with flowers and brought them fruits and coconuts. So they gave them necklaces made of flowers and then gave them fruits and coconuts. While the sailors rested and repaired the ships, Cook ordered a little hill cleared of trees and a watching post built. He put all of his astronomical equipment on this post and waited for the transit. 2 months later, the big day arrived. The tiny black speck of the distant planet moved slowly across the sun's surface, the sun's face. Cook watched carefully, taking measurements and recording them for the scientists of London. Now he could open his sealed instructions. Late that night, alone in his quarters, he lit a candle and broke the seal. He read the royal command twice and then 3 times. "You are to sail south," the orders read, "and find the great southern continent for England." The great southern continent, so he's been given another mission to do since he mapped out Venus passing. The great southern continent, geographers had long believed that a huge hidden continent must lie on the bottom of the earth. Otherwise, they were sure that the world would overbalance and tip over from the weight of all the land on the north half of the globe. So you have to remember, this is way before we knew how the earth was all made up. And so remember, a lot of people thought the earth was flat. So these people thought that they knew we had these continents up here because they had sailed and explored them. So they thought there has to be a land down here. Otherwise the world would be so heavy it'd tip over. Obviously gravity and things like that were not really common knowledge at this time. No one had ever found this mysterious land, but the year before, an English sea captain sailed through the Pacific and glimpsed distant mountains. George III exclaimed, "We must send ships to find it and claim it for England," right? Because if you're the first one to discover the land, you get to say it's yours. James Cook packed his reluctant men on board the Endeavour and turned south. Why do you guys think they were reluctant? Well, this is a gorgeous land with friendly people, lots of fruit, food, and beautiful people there. Now they have to leave to go find some unknown island. It was 3 months before they sighted land, a long jut of mountains thrusting out into the sea. Was this a peninsula attached to the great southern continent? They sailed around it at a distance, examining the shore. But the mountains belonged to 2 islands, separated by a ragged gulf. Cook was sailing around the country of New Zealand. So this is on the bottom, right, of when we look at the globe, and New Zealand is by Australia. And so this is the place that he's seeing. Cook wrote in his journal, "As to a southern continent, I do not believe any such thing exists." He turned the Endeavour for home. He had been traveling for 19 months and his crew was tired and ready to come home. Cook decided that they would go west for the return trip. He knew that another island had been sighted west of New Zealand, and he wanted to explore its coast on the way home. Soon the island came into view. Cook anchored his ship in a peaceful bay so that his sailors could find fresh water and prepare for the long journey back to Europe. Meanwhile, he drew maps of the shore. The island was so full of strange new plants that Cook named it Botany Bay. Botany means the study of plants. When the Endeavour launched again, James Cook sailed along the coast of this island, mapping as he went. He decided to call it New South Wales because it reminded him of the country of Wales in Britain. Cook almost didn't make it back to England with his new maps. Late one night, the Endeavour ran aground on a coral reef, an iron sharp ridge made up of the skeletons of tiny sea animals called coral polyps. This reef, the Great Barrier Reef, ran all along the coast of Australia. It ripped a hole in the ship's bottom. The sailors had to throw out all of the heavy cannons and iron, pump the ship out, sail it back to the coast, and mend it before they could continue on. They sailed up the rest of the coast, Cook mapping the whole way. Then he planted a British flag and announced that the whole coastline belonged to King George III of England. James Cook didn't realize it, but he had found the great southern continent. So without even realizing what he was doing, he found what they were thinking of. This island, New South Wales, was much bigger than he had ever imagined. You guys know where he had sailed? What are you thinking? What's on the bottom of the world? So he had sailed up the coast of Australia, the 7th continent on Earth. When he returned to England in 1771, bearing his measurements of Venus and his map of New South Wales, Cook was welcomed and praised for his discoveries. But the next year, he made another voyage looking for the great southern continent. On his second voyage, he went south into Antarctica and only found ice. So he went straight down instead of going over and down. He decided that looking for the great southern continent was a waste of time, even though he had already found it and not known it. So on this third voyage, he set off on a different mission, to look one last time for the Northwest Passage. Remember from the beginning of the book, they were looking for the Northwest Passage, the fabled path that ran through North America that would lead to China. After all of these years, the British were still hoping to find it. Cook planned to look for the passage along the western coast of North America. In 1776, the same year that America declared its independence, Cook sailed to New Zealand and then around to the Pacific coast of North America. Like other explorers, Cook couldn't find the Northwest Passage. He gave up and headed back south. His ships, the Resolution and the Discovery, were worn, battered with storms, their sails worn and split with travels, ropes frayed. Cook decided they would stop in Hawaii to outfit the ships. The Hawaiian natives welcomed the sailors with fruit, roast pig, and wreaths of flowers. The sailors thought that Hawaii was even better than Tahiti. They fixed the split sails and worn planks. They ate and ate and ate. Neither Cook nor his sailors realized that the Hawaiians were being so friendly because they believed that Cook was a god. Their legend said that their god of peace and happiness, Rono, would return to Hawaii in a floating forest. They thought that the masts of Cook's two ships were that forest, so the big mast and the ships they thought were the forests. But even a god can wear out his welcome. The sailors ate most of the natives' food. After 2 weeks one of the sailors wrote, later, the natives started patting the bellies of the sailors, telling them partly by signs and partly by words that it was time for them to go. All right, you're eating all of our food. Go ahead and leave now. Finally, the ships left the shores, repaired and ship shape. The sailors filled with delicious Hawaiian meat and fruits. But they only had been sailing for 3 days when a late night storm cracked the mast of Cook's ship. Cook decided they would return to Hawaii for more repairs. 4 days later, the ships limped into the harbor. We were surprised to find our reception very different from what it had been on our first arrival, wrote the same sailor. No shouts, no bustle, no confusion, but a solitary bay, with only here and there canoes stealing close to the shore. The natives weren't pleased to see that Rono and his fellow gods had returned. How much more food did the god of happiness want them to give him? They turned their backs and refused to feed the sailors. Some of them swam out to the ships that night and pulled nails out of the planks. Others pilfered iron tools from the ship's deck. Even one of the ship's boats disappeared, hauled away by unhappy natives. So they were not happy that these guys returned. They were very disappointed, thinking that all the gods wanted were to be fed. Cook decided to take violent measures. He rowed to the shore with 10 soldiers, planning to capture a Hawaiian chief and hold him hostage until the stolen boat was returned. The British party marched into the nearest village and demanded that the chief come with them back to their ship. Reluctantly, the chief came from his hut and began to walk with the soldiers back toward the shore. A mob gathered to watch. Younger men began to shout out to the chief, "Don't go any further. This is wrong. Sit down in the sand." The chief hesitated, and then it happened. One of the young warriors struck James Cook with a club. He stumbled and fell. Everyone could see the blood in his hair. This was no god, it was a mortal man. Furious, the other warriors rushed forward with their spears and daggers. The soldiers scrambled back to the boat, but 4 of them, and James Cook, lay dead on the beach. Cook's voyage south had been his last. So, because of his greediness, because he let them think he was the god and spoil them, when they realized he was human, they were way upset and they ended up killing him. All right, you will have questions to answer for this chapter, and please make sure you're writing quality answers to the questions being asked.